Someday, everyone that you know and love is going to gather in a room for your funeral. Not the most encouraging, line to start out a talk with, but let's close it in prayer. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but it's true. We are all going to die someday, and it's worth considering once in a while because I think it informs the way that we live. And hopefully you're going to get a better speech than that one. But understand clearly what people will remember about you and what they're going to say about you, the legacy that you leave, is going to be based on not what you believed or what you wished was true, but the way that you actually lived and what you actually did in your life. See, our legacy is determined by our actions. Legacy, it's more than a physical inheritance or heirlooms. It's the difference that we make in the lives of our family and our friends and others. And is it going to be something that pleases God? Will it be something that we're proud of? As a Jesus follower, I really hope that God's pleased with the life that I lead. And I hope that that's true of the people in our church as well. We don't have to wonder or guess what kind of life is God looking for. He was very clear. He actually sent a prophet to tell everybody, here's what I expect your life to look like. When that's the theme verse for our series, we're looking at the words of Micah. So if you want to pull out that outline, we're going to be looking at that first verse on your outline. Or if you are using the iPhone app, just make sure that you're on the Imperial Beach campus. Micah 6:8 says, "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy," underline that one, "and to walk humbly with your God." So each week in this series, we're looking at one of these three calls to action. Last week, we looked at what it looks like to act justly, and this week we're looking at loving mercy. But first, I think we need to understand the difference between justice and mercy. So to review, last week we said that the Hebrew word for justice is mishpat. To act justly is this idea of acting out mishpat, and it means put the emphasis on action. So write down action for that first fill-in. Now, most of us hear the action of justice, and we think Batman. Awesome, right? There's bad guys, and we're going to punch them in the face, and that's the action of justice. And that is an absolute part of justice, but that's justice from the punitive side. And mishpat is an idea a little bit bigger than that. And that's why we went all the way back to kind of the Hebrew word. We want to understand the full meaning of it. That's part of the definition is the punitive side, but mishpat means more than that. It also means helping those who are hurt by the world and by those who were unjust. It means restoring the wronged. It's the redemptive side of justice. So biblical justice demands that everyone gets what they deserve. The bad guys get knocked down a peg, and the people who are poor and destitute in life get a hand up as well. We learned last week that justice is a mega theme in the Bible, and it's absolutely tied to the very character of God, who takes up the cause of the orphan, the widow, the poor, and the refugee. And we see it in the life and legacy of Jesus. That should be no surprise, right? God in the flesh, it should look a lot like that. And it does. Jesus indiscriminately healed the sick, cared for the poor, touched the untouchables, and gave hope to those without any. We see that this legacy continued beyond Jesus with his followers. The church. The church has been one of the biggest proponents of justice in our world throughout history. Early Christians, when it was back in Romans and Greeks days, if they had babies with any kind of defect, they would just leave them outside the city, like the movie 300, right? It was just like, these guys aren't gonna work out for us. They don't meet our standards. We'll just leave them outside the city. It was Christians who actually took them into their homes, and they actually started orphanages. That never existed before Christians. Christians started most hospitals in the world. That's why so many of them were named after saints, because it's a Christian movement originally. Now today, Jesus followers start and run most of the compassionate, nonprofit, and relief organizations. So when you think relief organizations, you might think the Red Cross. It's not the red plus sign. It's the Red Cross because it actually has its origins in faith. The Salvation Army, right? Again, this is a Christian organization. YMCA, right? Remember the dance? Yeah, well, what's the C stand for? It stands for Christian. So this is something that has existed throughout kind of the Christian history. And our church is called to be a part of this legacy in our world. As we said last week, the world is not as it is intended to be. So we said if this is God's design for our world, if it's meant to be if this blanket is meant to be the fabric of God's design, that's the way he designed it to be, but unfortunately, our world looks a little bit more like this, because sin has ripped apart the fabric of God's design. And so we have all of these injustices, right? Maybe you've got war right here, famine right here, you've got hunger, you have orphans, and maybe Nicholas Sparks movies. So it's not working out the way that God designed it to be. Jesus came to show us how to restore and redeem the world back to the way he intended it to be. So we're to be his agents, taking those tattered threads and reweaving justice where there's injustice. And that's why you see in the history of the world and in the life of Jesus, us acting out those values of the kingdom of God, bringing back the fabric to the way that God designed it to be. Now, as we meet people's physical and emotional needs, of course, we're going to bring Jesus and meet their ultimate spiritual need as well. So, to please God, we want to act justly. That was last week. At the same time, we are to love mercy. So let's look at what's the Hebrew word for mercy here. It's hesed, and it puts the emphasis on, and you can write this down, the attitude or motive behind the action. Mercy has a lot to do with the heart. Now, it's not sympathy. The sympathy is feeling sorry for somebody. You can feel sorry for somebody and not do anything about it, okay? But if you are experiencing mercy for somebody, there's an action tied to that. You're moved so much that you're compassionate, right? So it's like you put yourself in their shoes, you see through their eyes, you feel what they feel, and you just have to do something about it. Mercy and justice are deeply linked. Mercy causes us to do something, to bring justice to an injustice. And when we do justice, we often get eyeball to eyeball or hand to hand. If we're handing a sandwich to somebody who's hungry, like it's a little different than if we just write a check, isn't it? So you experience mercy and it causes you to do something, and then you do something and it experiences a little bit more mercy. You can think of the relationship between justice and mercy like the pedals of a bicycle. Everybody remembers riding bicycles. You have to push the pedals, in sequence, right? When you first put your kids on a bike and you're like, okay, push with this foot, push with that foot. They try to push both feet at the same time and don't go anywhere. It's like this big frustrating enterprise. But eventually they get it figured out that if you get in the right rhythm of one, then the other, one, then the other, you can really go places. 2 years ago, you might remember the wild adventure that my family went on. We took our sabbatical, and that's a month off that pastors get every 7 years or something. And we decided we wanted to do something that we could never do unless we had a month off. And so our family at that time was just 4 of us, Christy and I, and then our 2 sons, Ryder and Liam. So they were aged 3 and 1. We got on a train because the 3-year-old loved trains, and we rode all the way up to San Francisco because we'd never seen the city and we wanted to see the city. When we got to the train station, we unloaded these big boxes, and inside were our bicycles. Okay, so we assembled our bicycles and the bike seats for the kids and all of that stuff right there in the train station. Then we began to ride them all around San Francisco. And then we rode them 706 miles all the way south through the PCH, down Big Sur, over 3 weeks to Imperial Beach. I think we have a picture of us riding bikes. So we did that. Now, we were not major cyclists. Like, I'm not the guy who has spandex shorts in a drawer or a pocket or wherever you store them. I don't know. Like, they don't have pockets either. They're just... I'm not going to get that into bicycling, but I needed to learn a little bit because we're going to do a 700-mile ride with little kids. Like, I need to know what I'm doing. And so I started to do a lot of research, and I found that your pedaling becomes dramatically more efficient if you can attach your feet to the pedals. Now, real cyclists, like triathletes and people who do that kind of ride for breakfast or whatever, they actually wear special shoes, and they wear lots of things that are special that I don't want to get into. So I didn't do the shoes, but they actually clip into the pedals, and your feet are attached. What we found were these little cages where you step on the pedal and it clips over your foot, and it allows your feet to be attached to the pedal, but you're not quite so committed that you can't get out. Anyway, what that allows you to do is as you push with one foot, you're able to pull up with the other foot. And you become dramatically more efficient in a number of ways. Because A, you get a lot more torque, you can go up hills, you're more steady, you're more smooth, but also you're using different muscle groups. And so it allows you to last a lot longer. Your endurance is a lot better. And again, 700 miles, right? We're going to need a lot of endurance. So that worked really, really well for us. Now, this is the relationship between justice and mercy. They work in concert with each other. You're being moved to compassion so much so that you do justice. That puts you life to life with somebody. You get to know them and their story, and that gives you more mercy for them. Because now it's not just someone who did this to themselves. It's, man, they've been through a lot. I can understand how they're there. Man, I really want to do something about it. Doing something about it gets me more involved in their life. And so it's just like this. And it's like, I said being attached to it, it becomes a part of who you are. When we live this way, experiencing justice, doing mercy, experiencing justice, doing mercy, our life gains speed and momentum. Pretty soon we're making a difference, living very generous and unselfish lives. We've experienced the joy of partnering with God to reweave the fabric in the broken places and people of this world. It becomes a part of who we are. We're attached to it from that moment on, and we begin to leave a legacy. So that's what mercy is. But what does mercy look like when it's lived out? Because if mercy is sort of the heart behind the action, well, how does it show up in life? Well, let's look to Jesus, because Jesus is always going to be our example as Christ followers. And so there's two stories that I put in there, and I'm just going to paraphrase these. I encourage you to read them this week. It's good homework. You can grab one of these Bibles if you don't have one in the lobby, or just Google these passages and they'll come up on your phone, okay? Matthew 18 is, and you might just write next to Matthew 18, mercy as forgiveness. So one of the ways that mercy shows up is in forgiveness. Again, you can read this story this week, but someone asked Jesus once, okay, so I know we're supposed to forgive people, but realistically, how many times? Is it like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me? Or is it 3 strikes and you're out? Like, what are the rules? Because there's all these rules. I mean, those are rules that we have in our culture. So how does this work? And Jesus tells this story. He tells a story about an unforgiving servant. Okay, so this was a servant of the king, and he made some big, risky play or whatever, and all of a sudden owed the king multiple years' wages. And the king came to collect, and he didn't have it. And there was no way he could ever earn it. It was like lifetimes of money. And so he begs for mercy. And the king decides to be merciful to him. He forgives the debt. And I don't know if it was the intensity of thinking he was going to go to prison or what, but somehow he remembered that somebody owed him money. And it was like, he owed him lunch money. It wasn't like a big deal. But he found that man who had owed him money. He demanded the money right now. And the man said, I can't pay. And instead of showing mercy, even though he'd just been shown mercy, he basically says, give it to me now. He has him thrown in prison. When the king finds out what happened, let's just say it didn't go well for the guy who was forgiven and then didn't forgive. So Jesus says that we're to be forgiving. That one of the ways that when we're like loving mercy, one of the things that we're going to be is very forgiving people. It's going to show up in forgiveness. Another way that it shows up is found in Luke 10. Okay, this is another story that Jesus told. And you might write down next to this one, mercy as good deeds. This is probably one of Jesus' most famous stories. And in fact, even if you're not familiar with the Bible, you've probably heard this one. We've told it a couple times at church this year already. I'm going to paraphrase it really quickly, but it's the story of the Good Samaritan. And in this story, essentially there's a wounded man who's beaten, robbed, and left for dead. And a number of people encounter this man on the road and do nothing about it. And then somebody who would not be a hero in the story, like culturally it'd be like if I was like, and then a Raider fan came down the street. Like this guy's from Samaria, and they hated those guys, the audience did. He comes down the street and he becomes the hero of the story because he picks this man up, he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to an inn, he himself bandages his wounds, and he pays for the man to stay long enough for him to recover. And it says that when he saw the man, he was moved to compassion. It's that same idea. He was moved with mercy. And how did it show up? It showed up in good deeds. And so that's one of the ways that mercy shows up in our lives as well. So both stories, Jesus is illustrating the importance of mercy in the lives of his followers. I'm going to invite Pastor James to give us 3 important truths from Jesus on mercy. Here's the first one. Write this down. Mercy is a necessity.
Jesus clearly teaches mercy is a necessity. It's a necessity. It is not optional equipment for the Jesus person. Mercy must be at the core of our faith because Jesus is the pinnacle of mercy. Jesus is the fullest expression of mercy. We have been forgiven of our sin through Jesus. And the deeper we understand God's mercy towards us, the more apt we are to extend mercy to people who hurt us. If you've been around our community for some time, you've heard us say the phrase before, hurt people, right? Those who have unresolved bitterness, anger, undealt with in their life, they tend to explode in anger and bitterness, and it causes hurt on other people. But the opposite of that is also true. What I mean is, healed people, those who've experienced healing, often help others get healed. People who have experienced mercy and understand the mercy that's been extended to them from God through Christ will be merciful to other people. So Jesus says mercy is a necessity. It is not optional for a Jesus person. Jesus also clearly is teaching that mercy is costly. Write that down. Mercy is costly. Mercy is always going to cost someone something. It's going to cost you your time. You're going to have to get personally involved. It's going to cost you money. You're going to have to start living in a way that says not everything that comes to me is for me, but I've been blessed to be a blessing. Mercy might cost you a reputation because people aren't going to understand why you would help them, why you would get involved. Like, why would you put yourself at risk and go there? Why would you disrupt your family like that? I can't believe that you would make those personal sacrifices. It might cause you to be misunderstood or even unaccepted by others. But mercy understands the cost is worth it. And those who mercy is spent on are worth it. And so mercy is a necessity. Mercy is costly. And if you've ever gotten involved in mercy, you know this, write it down. Mercy is messy. It never goes as you hoped or expected, right? I mean, when you extend mercy, not expecting anything in return, and it never goes the way you thought. Part of mercy involves leaving the outcomes to God. This was true of my wife and I's experience as foster parents. About 2 years ago, we became foster parents through Angel's Foster Family Network, which primarily deals with kids birth to 2. And it wasn't something we ever thought we would do. It was something the Lord led us to do. But when you are a foster parent, you have zero control of the outcome. All of a sudden they call you and say, hey, we have a kid for you, and you pick them up, and you don't know how long they're going to be with you. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 18 months. It depends on the situation with the parents and the legal issues and all the stuff that is happening. You are in zero control of the outcome. You're in zero control of when the social worker just stops in. You're in zero control of that kid's schedule in some ways because of schedules visiting a parent or appointments and all this kind of stuff. And so you really have to go into it with your hands open, just going, okay, we're called to do one thing. Love this kid like crazy while they're in our home. And make sure they have a great environment and they get what they deserve. Love, care, opportunity to thrive. And you got to hold the outcome loosely. And if you've ever been a foster parent, or maybe you went through an adoption process, or you've mentored in an at-risk youth organization, or you've done ministry to homeless, or you've ever been involved in any of those things, you understand that idea of like, man, you get involved with mercy, you extend it with an open mind and hands, but you leave the outcomes to God. But could you imagine if there were a group of people who actually lived this way? Like what would you call a group of people who actually regularly extended mercy as both forgiveness and good deeds? I mean, what would happen in our society if there was a group of people who would let forgiveness be the basis of all relationships? And who would extend mercy and justice to others through good deeds with no expectation of what they could ever do in return? What would you call a group of people like that? I'll tell you, the church. That's what you would call them. Because that's who we are to be. This is the legacy that we are to provide in our world. And so now that we know what mercy is and what mercy looks like, let me give you 2 things as we wrap this up. How can we develop a more merciful heart? Let me give you some things that you can do this week, that I can do this week, to live this way that Jesus says his followers are supposed to live. Loving mercy and acting justly. What can we do? Here's the first thing. First of all, know that every human being has great value.
So you can write that down. Every human being has great value. It's so easy to look at people who are struggling and think, well, I mean, they did this to themselves. This is the consequences of living like that. If that were me, I'd pull myself up by my bootstraps, or that's what you get for putting all your money into drugs or whatever. It's kind of arrogant of us to think like that, because we don't know their story or what got them there, and a lot of times they're running from something a lot bigger than that. C.S. Lewis says that we can't only consider someone's choices, we have to also consider the raw materials that they had to work with. That can really give you a lot more perspective and compassion. So I've mentioned this before, we're foster parents as well, so we have our now 3 biological kids and 2 foster kids. I can get frustrated in that with the birth parents, because you love these kids and these other people neglected and abused these kids. Or I love this kid and it's their birthday and you didn't show up. Like, it can be very frustrating to deal with them. And one of the things that helps me have compassion toward them is when I remember my training that 90% of the birth parents that have kids in the foster system were neglected and abused themselves. Like, not all of them were foster kids, many of them were, but all of them experienced neglect and abuse. And so that helps me have compassion for them. I have more mercy when I realize they actually don't know any better. Like, they never had a parent who showed up to their birthday party, and they don't understand. This is like the only thing they've ever known. They don't know what healthy looks like. Psalm 139 is in your outline. I encourage you to just read this. It's just a poem, and I would encourage you to take it to the beach this week and just reflect for a little bit. It talks about how God's intentional design with every single human being as a loved child of his, and everybody has such great value, even though life may have stomped it out of them. It's just something that would really grow a lot of compassion in us. When you see people as deeply loved children of God, it enables us to extend mercy more readily to them. Another way that we can develop a more merciful heart, write this down, is start doing mercy in small ways. We can start doing mercy in small ways. This means we open our eyes and we're more aware of the opportunities to be merciful around us. Mercy looks like, giving up your seat on the bus for somebody who needs it more. Mercy looks like making a habit of giving others the benefit of the doubt, believing the best and not assuming the worst. Mercy doesn't do things like let out an audible sigh in the grocery store line, right? Oh, like there's the coupons, there's the toddler freaking out, right? That's not a merciful reaction. Mercy notices the person who's struggling, who's alone, who might need a little extra attention or love or encouragement. And this is not easy. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. My reaction is usually not merciful. Thankfully, it's internal though, and then I often, with God's help, I'm able to correct it before it gets out. Everyone laughs. They're like, yeah, we know. Especially when you find yourself hardened to or annoyed by someone's brokenness. Mercy is a very difficult response to have. My friend Luke and I were talking about this just a couple weeks ago as I was preparing for this message. And he said that what helps him do this, mercy in small ways, is think about what you would want if you were the other person and do that. So if you really think for a second, if I was that person in that circumstance, what would I want? Then that often gives you the answer of what you can do. So one of our foster kids, we deal with all kinds of abuse and neglect histories, but that when you're born and you live in a difficult situation like that, it wires your brain to think that's normal and the world isn't safe, right? So one of our kids grew up homeless, on the streets for a couple years. So food is a big insecurity in his life because when you're homeless, you don't know when it's going to come or if it's going to come, and if it does come, you've got to eat it. You got to eat it quick because it might go away, and it's just like you pig out or you might lose out. So you really. Here's the thing though, now food has become an emotional trigger for him. So anytime food is around, it could just be that he sees someone eating and when are we going to eat next? And it becomes very on edge, okay? And it doesn't matter if we're about to feed him, like we have all of the people sitting at the table ready to eat. He's on edge and the slightest little thing will cause him to go into an absolute panic attack. So it could be something simple like, we're just waiting for your brother to join us at the table. Why aren't we eating right now? Just completely freaking out. So, toddlers freaking out doesn't breed a lot of patience and mercy in me, right? Especially, here's the thing, again, neural pathways have been formed. This is chemically, this is the way his brain thinks, and it takes 30,000 healthy repetitions before you can rewire your brain. So we eat 5 times a day, right? 3 meals, 2 snacks. We're very healthy people with our kids and stuff, and yet this is right on edge every time we eat, okay? So this week, or maybe last week, we sit down to eat, and we grab hands to pray, and it's like, oh, buddy, you didn't wash your hands. They're covered in mud from being outside. All the color drains from his face because he realizes it means we're not going to eat right this second. And he runs from the table to the bathroom, and he's just sobbing, and it's oh, now, as a parent, my response was just because, again, it's frustrating to have kids screaming, in your home, especially when it's we're trying to feed you. We feed you all the time. We've never not fed you in a year. But I felt like I was moved to compassion in that moment. I felt like the Holy Spirit did that thing, which he often does by, grab my face or whatever. It's just hey, think about where he's been. And I immediately had compassion, and I thought, back to the words of my friend Luke, if I were him right now, what would I want from my dad? And I thought, I'll go wash his hands. I don't need to put that responsibility on him, right? And as I get up, I think, I'd also want a chicken nugget, so I grabbed a chicken nugget. And I came into the bathroom, and I just said, hey, buddy, is it okay if I share a chicken nugget with you? And just all the color came back in his face, big smile, and I said, this is my chicken nugget. It's not yours. I didn't take it from you. I'm going to share it with you. And he's just like, well, thank you, Daddy. Is it okay if I wash your hands? I wash his little hands for him, right? And thank you, Daddy. And we walk back to the table together, and everything's back to normal. And mercy changed everything in that moment for my son, but I'll tell you what, mercy changed everything in that moment for me as well. And so that's one of the things that can happen when we allow mercy to be a part of our lives. It's going to change everything for us. I'm going to have Pastor James finish us off with just another story of incredible mercy from our church. This happened at the Chula Vista campus, and he got to be kind of a part of this story. So I want him to share this with you. Watch this.
Incredible story of mercy that's unfolded in our community over the last 2 years and been participated in by 2 different families in our church. About 2.5 years ago, a 4th grade teacher in our church got a new classroom of students, and That teacher, as the school year progressed, noticed that one of her students was greatly struggling. Struggling academically, but also just struggling socially and emotionally with all the other students. And so just as the school year went on, just noticed the difficulties that this student had. And every time that they would send assignments back that would need signatures from a parent or guardian, this student was the one who never once had a signature from a parent or adult. And it just seemed like the student was alone and by himself. Every time a teacher-parent conference showed up, nobody ever came. And this teacher began to be moved by mercy for this student, and found out that the student was in foster care and more of a older kid group home setting, and was honestly in some ways just falling through the cracks. And this teacher was moved by mercy and got engaged in doing acts of justice, and started saying, you know what, I need to get involved at a greater level, and started doing tutoring after school to help this student, and started talking to the resource counselor and saying, okay, we need to help this student socially and emotionally, and got involved. And over the next year, the principal also, was moved by mercy and got involved, because this student, over really the next 2 years, was tried to be put back with a parent whose life was a mess and didn't have it together, and then was taken back from that parent again, put in another foster home that was outside of that school district. And it was this principal that fought on behalf of that student to say, you know what, let's keep some stability in this kid's life. Let's keep him here. There are teachers that will care, that will help, that will be a support. And so again, it was a group of people moved by mercy, doing acts of justice. And meanwhile, while this is going on, go back over a year ago, there's another family in our church who began to be moved by mercy and begin to think that maybe the Lord was leading them to start investigating adoption. And specifically to adopt an older child. They have three boys of their own already, two of which have different varying levels of special needs. And there were some people that were like, what? I mean, you guys already have your hands full. You're thinking about adopting? Like, are you crazy? And I know at times they thought they were crazy. Like, man, what are we thinking? But they just felt like, man, this is something the Lord's asking us to do. And so they kept moving forward. And this family that was checking out adoption, like, the speed at which they told them this would happen, it wasn't happening. And they would hit obstacles, and there were several times they were just going to give up. And they're like, hey, I guess, man, different things keep happening. I guess we're not supposed to do this. When about 6 weeks ago, they had the final meeting where it was like, okay, we go do this, and then we're approved for adoption. And they weren't even sure they were going to do it. They're just like, oh, okay. And so the husband was like, I'll take care of it, and went and did their last thing. Guess who came up for adoption within days of that family in our church finishing that adoption process? That boy who over 2 years ago was extended mercy by another member of our church, that fourth grade teacher. And that boy right now has been in their home. He is their forever son now, and been adopted, and he can be a boy again. He can be loved. He has stability. He's getting what he deserves, right? Like the basic opportunity to be loved and to thrive and to become who God's created him to be. But here's what I want to point out. It started from a teacher being moved by mercy, doing acts of justice, who had no clue how the story would end. I know that not every act of mercy is going to end with this beautiful bow on it like that story, okay? Like we're not all going to go out this week and then we're all going to have amazing stories of look how this person's life was changed forever. That's not how every story goes. But that story would never have happened had there not been a teacher, and then a couple teachers, and then a principal, and a group of people who just said, you know what, we're going to be moved by mercy. And they couldn't control the outcomes. There were so many times that I prayed with that teacher because that teacher was at the school where my kids go. And there were times where I would walk on campus, pick up my kids, and be leaving and stop and have a conversation with that teacher. And she would go, man, would you pray with me? I have this student, and it seems like nobody's getting help, and he's in the foster care system, and nothing's happening, but I'm trying, and I'm praying, and would you pray with me? And then we prayed for him, and I had no clue some of those prayers that we prayed over 2 years ago would be answered by another family in our church. And my point is this. We never know the outcome, but God does. And God will take our acts of mercy and accomplish his purposes. And so all I'm doing this weekend is I'm issuing the mercy challenge. Would you this week look for opportunities to extend mercy as forgiveness and look for opportunities to extend mercy as good deeds and leave the outcomes to God? Would you be moved by mercy and do justice? And a great opportunity for us to collectively do justice is through our Christmas conspiracy offering, where we unashamedly ask every member at all of our churches to give generously and sacrificially over above our tithe so that we can make a difference in our broken world. And so each week we're introducing you to different parts of the Christmas conspiracy. And I want you to watch this video that talks about one of our partners and the great work that they are doing in the world. Watch this.